The rain had been falling for 3 days, straight when Ethan Cole received the envelope. That would change his life forever. It arrived without a return address, tucked between bills and advertisements in his mailbox. The paper was old, yellowed at the edges, as if it had spent years hidden away from sunlight. Across the front, written in shaky handwriting, were 4 simple words. They lied to everyone. Ethan stared at the message for several moments before opening it. Inside was a single photograph. The image showed a government building surrounded by police vehicles. Men in dark suits stood near the entrance. At first glance, nothing seemed unusual. Then Ethan noticed the date. The photograph had been taken 20 years ago, on the exact day of a devastating factory explosion that had killed hundreds of people in the city of Fairmont. The tragedy had become one of the most studied disasters in modern American history. Investigators concluded it was caused by faulty equipment and poor maintenance. Case closed. But the building in the photograph was located over 200 miles away. Why would senior officials be gathered there during the worst industrial disaster in decades? A second item slipped from the envelope. A note: if you want the truth, go to locker 314. Central Station, no signature, no explanation. Ethan had spent 10 years as an investigative journalist before moving to a small newspaper, after becoming frustrated with politics and corruption. Most stories led nowhere. But something about this felt different. The next morning he drove to Central Station. Locker 314 stood near the back wall. His heart pounded as he entered the combination written on the note. The door clicked open. Inside sat a black flash drive. Nothing else. Ethan hurried home and inserted it into his computer. Hundreds of files appeared: reports, emails, financial records, meeting transcripts. At first the documents seemed unrelated. Then a pattern emerged. Every file connected to Fairmont. Every file contradicted the official story. According to the records, inspectors had discovered dangerous conditions at the factory months before the explosion. They repeatedly warned executives and government regulators. The warnings vanished. Reports were altered. Investigations were delayed. Evidence disappeared. Worst of all, documents showed that several powerful officials knew the factory was at risk of catastrophic failure. They did nothing. Ethan leaned back in disbelief. If the files were genuine, the disaster had not been an accident. It had been preventable. And someone had worked very hard to hide that fact. A folder labeled "Final Meeting" caught his attention. Inside was a transcript dated 2 weeks before the explosion. One executive spoke clearly. "If we shut operations down now, we lose billions." Another voice replied, "And if something happens?" A third person answered, "Nothing will happen." The transcript ended there. 2 weeks later, hundreds were dead. Ethan felt sick. For hours he reviewed documents. Every file pointed toward a coordinated cover-up. Yet one question remained. Who sent him the evidence? The answer arrived that evening. A phone call. The voice was old and trembling. "You opened the locker?" "Who are you?" Ethan asked. "Someone who waited too long." "Did you send the files?" "Less. Why now?" Silence filled the line. Then the caller spoke. "Because I'm dying." The man introduced himself as Robert Hayes. For years he had worked inside the regulatory agency responsible for factory inspections. He agreed to meet. The following day Ethan drove to a small town outside the city. Robert lived alone in a modest house surrounded by overgrown trees. The old man looked exhausted. His hands shook as he invited Ethan inside. Stacks of documents filled the room. Boxes lined the walls, evidence collected over decades. "I kept everything," Robert said. "Why?" "Guilt." He stared out the window. "I helped them." The words hung heavily in the air. Robert explained that shortly after inspectors discovered dangerous conditions at the factory. Senior officials ordered reports to be changed. He protested. They threatened his career. Eventually, he complied. Others did the same. Everyone convinced themselves they were protecting jobs and preventing panic. Then the explosion happened. Robert never forgave himself. For 20 years, I've watched families bury loved ones, while politicians stood on stages talking about an accident. His voice cracked. It wasn't an accident. Ethan spent hours recording testimony. When he left, the sky was dark. For the first time, he realized how dangerous the story could become. The people involved were powerful. Some still held influential positions. Others controlled enormous corporations. Exposing them would have consequences. Within days, strange things began happening. A black SUV appeared outside Ethan's apartment. Unknown numbers called his phone and immediately hung up. His email accounts experienced repeated login attempts. Someone was watching. The pressure intensified after he contacted former employees connected to the case. Several refused interviews. Others abruptly canceled meetings. One source vanished entirely. Fear spread wherever Ethan looked. The deeper he dug, the more resistance he encountered. Then Robert disappeared. Ethan arrived at the old man's house for a scheduled interview. Police cars filled the driveway. An officer informed him that Robert had died during the night. Natural causes. Case closed. Ethan stared at the house. Something felt wrong. Only hours earlier, Robert had sounded determined. Hopeful, even. Now he was gone. The timing seemed impossible to ignore. After the funeral, Ethan received another anonymous message. This time it contained only one sentence. They know what you're doing. No signature. No explanation. For the first time, fear outweighed curiosity. He considered abandoning the investigation. Nobody would blame him. The story involved wealthy executives, influential politicians, and decades of hidden corruption. Walking away would be easy. Safer. Yet every time he thought about quitting, he remembered photographs of the victims. Workers who never returned home. Parents. Children. Friends. People who trusted leaders to protect them. People who never knew the truth. Ethan continued. Months passed. The evidence grew overwhelming. Financial records revealed secret payments between corporations and consulting firms linked to government officials. Witnesses described pressure to remain silent. Former investigators admitted key evidence had disappeared before final reports were released. Piece by piece, the cover-up became impossible to deny. Still, no major news organization wanted the story. Editors worried about lawsuits. Executives feared political consequences. The evidence was explosive. Publishing it could trigger national outrage. One editor summed it up bluntly. If this is true, careers will end. Eventually, Ethan partnered with an independent media organization willing to take the risk. Lawyers spent weeks reviewing documents. Experts verified signatures. Analysts confirmed financial transactions. Every major claim survived scrutiny. Publication day arrived. At exactly 8:00 a.m., the investigation went live. The response was immediate. Millions read the report within hours. Families of victims demanded answers. Lawmakers called emergency hearings. Television networks interrupted regular programming. Social media erupted. The story dominated headlines worldwide. The secret cover-up that nobody wanted exposed was finally public. Yet the most shocking revelations emerged afterward. Whistleblowers came forward in large numbers. Former employees revealed additional misconduct. Investigators reopened long-forgotten files. Journalists uncovered connections extending far beyond Fairmont. The disaster had become part of a much larger pattern. Again and again, organizations prioritized profits over safety. Again and again, warnings were ignored. Again and again, truth was buried beneath carefully crafted narratives. The public realized Fairmont was not an isolated incident. It was a symptom of a deeper problem. Months later, Congressional hearings began. Executives testified under oath. Some denied wrongdoing. Others claimed ignorance. But evidence told a different story. Recorded meetings contradicted public statements. Internal emails exposed deliberate deception. Financial records traced hidden decisions. One by one, carefully constructed defenses collapsed. Several officials resigned. Criminal investigations followed. Civil lawsuits multiplied. Families finally gained access to information hidden from them for decades. For many, the truth brought both relief and anger. Relief because unanswered questions finally had answers. Anger because those answers arrived 20 years too late. During one hearing, a woman named Maria stood before lawmakers. Her husband had died in the explosion. For 2 decades, she believed fate had taken him. Now she knew negligence had played a role. She looked directly at the officials seated before her. "My children grew up without a father because people chose money over human lives." The room fell silent. No defense could erase that reality. No explanation could undo the damage. Months turned into years. The story transformed national policy. Safety regulations strengthened. Whistleblower protections expanded. Government agencies faced increased oversight. While reforms could not bring back victims, they reduced the likelihood of similar tragedies. Ethan continued reporting. Yet despite awards and recognition, one question remained unanswered. Who originally sent the envelope? Robert admitted placing the flash drive in the locker, but he insisted someone else had delivered the photograph and first message. "I wasn't the first person trying to reveal the truth," he told Ethan during their final interview. "I was just the last one left." The mystery lingered. Then, nearly 2 years after publication, Ethan received another envelope. No return address. Inside was a photograph. A younger Robert stood beside several coworkers. One face had been circled in red ink. A note accompanied the image. She started it. Ethan researched the woman immediately. Her name was Sarah Mitchell. She had been an investigator assigned to the original disaster inquiry. Records showed she resigned unexpectedly 6 months after the explosion. Then she disappeared from public life. After weeks of searching, Ethan located her sister. The story she told completed the puzzle. Sarah had discovered evidence contradicting official conclusions. She attempted to report her findings. Superiors blocked her efforts. Colleagues distanced themselves. Eventually, she lost her job. Years later, she died without ever seeing justice. Before her death, she entrusted copies of evidence to several people, including Robert. She feared the truth would vanish forever. In the end, it nearly did. One determined investigator, one guilty whistleblower, one journalist. Together, they exposed a deception that powerful people believed would remain hidden forever. Standing in his office late one evening, Ethan reflected on the journey. Outside, city lights stretched across the horizon. Countless people moved through their lives unaware of how close the truth had come to disappearing. History often remembered victories. Rarely did it remember the individuals who spent decades fighting simply to be heard. The cover-up succeeded for 20 years. It silenced witnesses, destroyed careers, protected reputations. But secrets possess a weakness. No matter how deeply they are buried, they depend upon silence. And silence never lasts forever. Someone always remembers. Someone always keeps a document, saves a photograph, records a conversation, or refuses to let the truth die. The people responsible for Fairmont believed time would protect them. They believed memories would fade. They believed evidence would disappear. They were wrong. Because truth has patience. It waits. Sometimes for months, sometimes for years, sometimes for generations. But eventually, it finds its way into the light. And when it does, even the most carefully constructed cover-up can collapse in a single moment. The secret nobody wanted the world to know had finally been exposed. Not because powerful people chose honesty. Not because institutions corrected themselves. But because ordinary individuals refused to stop searching. And that, Ethan realized, was the most important lesson of all. The truth is often hidden. Sometimes intentionally. Sometimes beneath layers of fear, influence, and manipulation. Yet as long as someone continues asking questions, no secret remains buried forever. Somewhere, in some forgotten drawer or dusty archive, evidence survives. Somewhere, a witness still remembers. Somewhere, another envelope waits to be opened. And somewhere, another story is waiting for someone brave enough to uncover it.